Sustainable You is a casual, interactive, yet informative series detailing and cataloging the sustainability experience. Moreover, this is a short podcast docuseries detailing the thoughts and experiences of passionate advocates towards all things eco-friendly. Our journey is to know how and why understanding sustainable development towards the triple bottom line of people, profit, and planet can contribute to a more mindful, holistic, and inclusive world. Specifically, this podcast showcases what makes you a changemaker, innovator, and transformer as you tackle sustainability challenges for current and future generations to resolve those so-called wicked problems. We had the opportunity to learn more about hemp and cannabis and their potential as a sustainable swap or eco-friendly alternative in today's episode. We had a thoughtful conversation with Julyan Levy, a PhD candidate and researcher from Coventry University in the United Kingdom. In addition to being a strong supporter of small-scale urban agriculture methods for the medical and recreational use of cannabis, Julyan's research interests center on the link between humans and cannabis, as well as plant agency itself. We also go into greater detail on how the cross-comparison between the legalization of cannabis differs in the UK and Canada. To find out more about how cannabis can help create a more environmentally friendly future, stay tuned. So we're just going to play a quick icebreaker. So I'm going to send you a list of adjectives and you're going to choose one basically that matches with your persona. And this is again to get to know our participants, to know why they picked that word in particular and how it relates to your current vocation or calling.
Wow. Well, I'm not impish. Jolly. Lax is my modest, naive, naughty. Okay. Quiet, quirky.
They're pretty random words, but yeah.
I'd probably say. No, I'm not even sure I'd say that. That's difficult. Picking one. I'm going to go with calm.
Okay, I think that makes sense considering you're at research as an academic. Why did you pick that in particular?
So I picked calm, I suppose, because it's almost an aspirational thing. As in, staying calm helps. If you can't always stay calm, and maybe there's situations where you shouldn't stay calm as well.
Right.
I'm not saying calm is some ideal great place to be at. There's times when you probably shouldn't be calm. In fact, I know that, especially in the world we live in right now and what's going on. Staying calm isn't necessarily the best option. I mean it more as even if you are going to start from a place of calmness so that you're clear doing. Does that make sense? And yeah. I'm not always like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you need a sense of calmness and even mindfulness to be a researcher. So I think that's a good answer. Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, perfect. Thanks for sharing. Okay. And just on this next part, just to get to know you a little bit more. So what makes you uncertain and what makes you curious?
What makes me uncertain is I suppose in my research is full of uncertainties. Yeah. From my own actual philosophical standpoint, I wouldn't say uncertain.
What makes you uncertain?
So uncertain. Yeah, that's just you can't predict anything. So there's uncertainties everywhere, isn't there? And like I say, I have uncertainties in my own research, and I suppose that's just something that I overcome on a daily basis. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's difficult. I think
there was something else as well. You said uncertainties and
curiosity. What kind of piques your curiosity?
Okay, yeah, those uncertainties, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay, great. Yeah, because I guess in a sense you're right. It is, you never know the trajectory of your research. And after doing my master's, I realized I don't know if I can commit to a doctorate because there is so much. It's the unknown, and I guess you need to have to be genuinely curious about that. Yeah.
You've got to want to find something out.
Yeah, and I'm just curious on that. So, like, how you actually got into this? Because I haven't seen too much research or like too much research and researchers in general, and kind of in that overlap between sustainable practices and cannabis. So, I guess what are your struggles, your aspirations, and your contributions that kind of led you or motivated you to get involved, I guess, in cannabis research?
Research in cannabis is kind of grows out of a wider research interest, I suppose. It's like, when I first started getting into research, I wasn't really thinking about cannabis. I've been in a relationship with the plant since I was a teenager, but that was a separate thing. And it's always been like a companion, although
Right.
I didn't view it like that until I came into academia. So, it's something I used as a parent. I think it helped make me a better parent, actually. And I'm not saying that can be applied to everyone. That's just me. And so I had this relationship with this plant. And then meanwhile, I was, in my 20s and 30s, engaging with politics, being politically engaged more and more as my children were growing up. And I suppose I was just a chef, not just a chef. I was a chef, but I felt like a cook, actually. I was cooking.
Okay.
That's what I did in my 20s and 30s. Cooked. Chefed and cooked. But I suppose I wanted to go into academia to, like anyone goes into academia, it's to legitimize an argument. That's what I see academia is. You can either be someone who's outside of the system and trying to point out what's going wrong, or what you think is going wrong, or what you think could be better. I think it's difficult to do that. And I think academia gives you a legitimacy in the world, which I'm not saying it should be like that, but it does. And then so I went and did anthropology. I was interested in human culture and how cultures evolved and what makes us human, that kind of thing. Talking about companion species, and they're talking about more than human ways of being in the world. And something, for me, suddenly my relationship with cannabis suddenly felt like what they were talking about. And so from that, I suppose I really started thinking about cannabis as a plant that's a companion, that's, along with the plant having quite an effect on me through cultivating it,
Okay.
developing a relationship with it. I don't do that anymore, for the record. In the UK, yeah. But I did when I was younger. I'd find a field.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's what led me to think about plants and their agency, the impact the plant has on us, not just what we're doing to the plant, what the plant does to us. And then you start opening up things around reciprocity. And then you start thinking, pre-colonialism, people's relationships, that their relationship with plants was not, without generalizing, but, concepts of kinship. Yeah, so that's, when I think about cannabis, that's probably why I think we need to respect the plant, or else it might not be a good thing for us.
Right.
Or the plant.
Right. No, thanks for sharing. And I really like your trajectory, how you went from being like a chef and then you kind of wanted to learn more about how this crop or, this plant works. And I'm also a fan of Donna Haraway. Again, like learning what gives someone a sense of agency and having the ethic of care towards all types of biodiversity. I think it's really essential. Yeah. Okay, great. And then now we'll get into the actual why we're here today is getting to know more about your research. So do you want to summarize the article for our listeners? Because I really like how you mentioned, here it says, to improve soil health and carbon storage. And even I didn't realize it can be a sustainable swap. It could be a sustainable swap for plastic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I gleaned a lot off the article.
5 ways cannabis can contribute to a green future. This came off like thinking about an article, a report from the charity Transform, who have sort of done their research, and it shows that cannabis could raise 1.5 billion for the UK economy. So that gets me thinking, it's good. It's got monetary economic benefits, but it also has other benefits. So it can have productive harvests. Really what I'm saying there is I'm thinking about small scale agriculture, agroecology, and it lends itself to small scale. There are people making things out using it as a plastic alternative. Some of these things are speculative, but there are hemp bioplastics, and people have built cars. I think someone built an aeroplane. It's not that, when I think about that, I think it's hard for me to make the leap that, we're suddenly going to be growing lots of hemp to make cars, because really we shouldn't be making more cars. Cutting our plastic use, we should be cutting our consumption. So often in sustainability narratives there is like replacements, but we shouldn't really be carrying on living the way we are. So it's like, it'd be fine if all the plastic bottles in all the vending machines were plastic hemp, then that would be okay, would it? So it's not my favourite one when I think about plastics, but like I say, it's like, well, it can do this. We don't have to live in a world without any plastic.
Right.
Yeah, it stores carbon. It's a photosynthesizing plant and it grows quickly and it stores carbon. And carbon by, we can measure that by the bricks we can make from the blocks, the hempcrete blocks, the carbon stored in there. So you're pulling the carbon out of the air and then you can make houses with the stored carbon. I mean, it's a clever system. And energy storage, that's another sort of slightly speculative use. But like I say, I think sometimes it's good to have speculation, almost a bit of a science fiction spin on it. So, you can use hemp to make a graphene alternative. Graphene is a material that's used for these big batteries. And these big batteries, these supercapacitors, they're not batteries, but it's a good way to think of it. They can store lots of renewable energy. Once again, when I think of these things, I think of them very much in an alternative economic system, or where like maybe they're community owned. Maybe each city has a huge battery and it's community owned. Someone's not making huge profits off it. That's always in the back of my mind. So especially when you think about the discourse of hemp and it can do this, that, and the other, it's like that doesn't mean that there should be a big corporation with like 10,000 acres. But we don't know what that would do. Monocultures are not huge. Monocultures are not. They're proving to be difficult. They create extra problems. You have a monoculture, you create some spray for this bug, and because you've killed that bug, another thing goes wrong. And we can't do it. And I think sooner or later we've got to accept that. But that goes against dominant economic models. So I see all these things connected. I find it difficult to separate.
I think it's interesting you mentioned things like, because I was just thinking of Earthship homes and like, how people are using recycled denim for home insulation, because I used to work in home improvement. I'm like, oh, well, hemp could be used maybe as insulation. You never know. And I didn't realize it's so versatile, this material. And I think despite the legalization in Canada, we haven't really talked about the benefits to this level.
They're hugely beneficial. I mean, like you say,
yeah, definitely. And just on that, maybe before we get into more detail, do you actually want to differentiate, and give us the definitions? So what's the difference between cannabis, CBD, and hemp, just for our listeners out there who may not be familiar?
Yeah, I can do that. So hemp is essentially cannabis sativa. Actually, I'm going to say that I'm going to try and simplify, but actually the plant is very elusive and it's not simple to just say, well, this is that, and this is that.
Okay.
I mean, there's not 100% agreement, but generally there's two types of cannabis. There's cannabis indica. And even I'm creating a binary there that because of the mass hybridization of the plant, you can't even really say that. But hemp traditionally is, over the years, it had its, I mean, let's not get into the genealogy because, that's a whole other story, but somewhere along the line, when we started using it, or maybe it was humans who bred the THC out, maybe they found that this kind of strain, if they farmed it this way and they, the fibers were stronger. So hemp is essentially cannabis sativa that has had the levels of THC bred out of it. So there's literally no THC. Or there's different laws around the world. So in the UK, you can grow hemp up to 0.2% THC in it, which is a trace level. But now the complication comes is because CBDs, what happens is you have female cannabis flowers contain the cannabinoids, the chemical compounds, the goodies, if you like, flowers. Now, you might not have THC in those flowers, but in recent years they've discovered other chemical compounds, and CBD is one of these compounds. So since then, breeders have bred strains of cannabis, which isn't exactly hemp. It originates from really sort of China, Eastern China, the Indian subcontinent.
Okay.
But, it's hard to find. It's hard to, so CBD, so is hemp cannabis. Yeah, so really they're all one thing. It depends on the strains you're growing, what you're growing it for, where you're growing it. Cannabis is very adaptable. That's probably why it's evolved into these two and more types, is because it will change. So I've spoke to hemp farmers who have managed to breed the CBD, experimented and bred THC back into hemp.
Okay, so I'm curious, in the UK, you can grow like hemp and CBD, they're both not allowed to be, or how does it work there?
So currently UK is extremely strict. You can't even, you can grow hemp, but you're not allowed to harvest CBD.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
You can use it for textiles or bedding, or make tea out of the leaves, which is absurd, really, if you think from an monetary economic place, because it's a real money spinner, CBD. And, Switzerland, Netherlands, other countries in Europe are growing hemp for the CBD, and we have to import it. And it seems absurd that the government have put a brake on the ability for hemp farmers here to make proper money out of their crop. In fact, one hemp farm, they had to burn all their flowers. They had to destroy all the CBD. Yeah, I think it's political laziness, because it's almost too much for them to deal with. Europe have regulated it and called it a food thing, and it's like they don't even want to deal with it. But I don't know. Yeah, so that's where we're at in the UK with hemp.
Okay, yeah, no, thanks for long-winded definition. I think we definitely need that, because people tend to get it confused and they don't know the nuances, and it can get convoluted, I guess, if you don't know too much about it. But
well, it is. That's the problem. It is convoluted. I mean, CBD is a non-psychoactive. They say it's a non-psychoactive chemical compound that comes from psychoactive, if you ask me.
I'm not an avid pot smoker, but I smoke more leisurely, but I know what you mean, yeah. Because even when I go to dispensary here, I can't really tell. I have to keep asking the customer service reps about the different strains. So just getting it itself is confusing at times.
Yeah, and you can get. I know you can buy seeds that are like 10% CBD, 10% CHC.
Yeah, it gets pretty confusing.
Yeah.
But okay, great. Thanks for sharing the definition. So now getting a bit more into sustainability. So do you have any particular definition of sustainability, and is there any sustainable development goals that you best advocate for? Do you find that these SDGs, do they still hold merit?
Okay, so sustainability is to provide for future generations, live within our means now and provide for our grandchildren, our grandchildren's grandchildren. I mean, that's a simplified, isn't it? And really, I don't see how we can do that with the dominant economic systems. And the Sustainable Development Goals don't really challenge that. Really, I'm not saying they've got no value. Of course they've got value. Each one of them we should all be, is a priority, but I don't see how we can achieve them using the tools of colonial capitalism. I don't think we can achieve those goals. I mean, we seem really far away from it anyway. So yes, like I was saying earlier, so for me, sustainability is about scale as well. We didn't understand when the Green Revolution came, and the Green Revolution about trying to maximise crop production to feed more people, and maybe there's good intentions there, but actually we create more problems that we can't see. So once again, we think about sustainability in cannabis. with corporations. I don't see how that's helping, because I think that we could learn a lot more from actually having our hands in the soil and learning how to grow it and developing a relationship. Maybe not everyone wants to do that. There should be the choice and access to do that. So even if I don't want to do it, maybe I know someone around the corner who loves growing it. That's why grow your own. I mean, I do a little bit of activism here. I volunteer with the Green Party in England and Wales, and it's a real emphasis on grow your own. I think that's so important. I think developing a relationship with the plant should be paramount. And also for young people, if young people are being exposed to there's still like the taboo and the scare stories here. I don't know about where you are. It's maybe a bit different where you are. I don't know. Every so often you still get the scare stories about the plant and how it's, causing. Yeah. So
yeah. Okay.
So that to me is sustainability. Sustainability is developing relationships with the plant.
Right. Yeah, that's really insightful that you mentioned that. And I agree. I do find that, at least in grad school, I came to that revelation that things like the concept sustainable development itself is a paradox.
Yeah.
And when you look at things like degrowth, that's not something we would ever talk about in a business school, at least in Canada. And I didn't really see it from that perspective at the time. But
degrowth is interesting. I like a lot of the degrowth. It's still quite a centralist concept. It's a binary, isn't it? Where it's growth or degrowth.
Yeah.
So if we're thinking it's important, but it's this or it's that. You can have little growths to a certain point, and then it doesn't need to grow anymore. And you can have a little growth here, and anyone else has to think about it. Really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think you mentioned about binaries, and I think we do need to dismantle those binaries because we all are kind of seeing it and. It's either black or white, and it's not necessarily like that.
No, the world's more complicated than that, isn't it?
So you definitely need to adopt that, I guess, eco-inclusive ethic, and I think that's not talked about enough. So it's
absolutely.
And then I wanted to get a bit more into your research. So what would you say what you're researching right now? What are its core values and intent? And what kind of motivates you? I know you talked a little bit about it before, but I guess how has your research helped to inform and inspire you as an academic of eco-friendly practices and botany and looking at things like the cannabis plant, as you mentioned?
I'm looking at non-capitalist economic relationships, human-plant economic relationships. So first, thinking in genealogical terms, what economic relationships have we had, or when did it change? Where did it change? Why did it change? There is some obvious sort of entry points. I think about Columbus seeking a quicker route to the spice trade, motivated by nutmeg and the enchantment of these spices. Really sort of, I see the agency of these spices as quite important. So I'm going to go off at tangents then. So I'm thinking about plant agency and all the different economic relationships. And so like I say, Columbus spies the relationship between enslaved Africans and tobacco, and the relationship of tobacco with indigenous people, and how that changed, and how essentially the white man came and transformed this relationship. It's complex, isn't it? It's difficult to just pin it down to. But through colonialism, there's this other relationship, the human-plant relationship, that's brutal and violent. But there was other relationships happening at the same time that weren't capitalist. There was relationships here in Britain, across Europe, with plants. I suppose what we term now as herbalism. I doubt it was called herbalism then, but we frame it as herbalism now. So I'm just interested in these spaces that show the cracks in capitalism, I suppose, and that colonial capitalism hasn't quite destroyed everything, I suppose. So that's what I'm seeking. I mean, I'm only like a year into my PhD, so I'm still shaping it. Yeah. So in fact, I had a supervisor meeting earlier, and it was quite helpful. They're always helpful in keeping me grounded.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like you know the intent behind your research. You seem like you are off to a strong start. I'm not alone in this. A lot of academics. There's quite a move to make visible the invisible more than human. Scholarship. I suppose if we become more affected and attentive
to the world around us, we can change the story. I mean, also recognising, as I've said before, that this isn't a new story, and somehow sensitively respecting and acknowledging Indigenous knowledge before running away with this more than human concept as if it's a Western scientific discovery, that, for instance, or that plants are beings. And yeah, I've got to acknowledge that and be respectful to that, and then see where that takes me as a white European. I'm not, I can say that this is what Indigenous people did. They've always done it. Colonialism came along, stole all that knowledge, suppressed them, subjugated, reframed it, renamed it, and said, look what we found. So that, to me, in my genealogy, is to be explicit in that. I think that there's a responsibility. I think all academics have a responsibility to acknowledge that their knowledge was what their knowledge came out of, what it was built on, and all Western science was built on colonialism. I mean, I came from anthropology. Anthropology is no different. Geography, no different. The maps were drawn. There was always an agenda, a settler agenda. I think it's also knowledge, the peasantry in Europe, whilst I'm not using the term indigenous, because that's got a specific meaning, but the pre-capitalist peasantry also were subjugated in colonial. Sorry if I'm...
I actually appreciate the tangents. I don't mind them at all, because I also have a background in anthropology, which is kind of why I chose Visby, because in Sweden they have that medieval wall, and we don't have medieval stuff in Canada.
Right, yeah.
So I was like, oh my god, a medieval wall. I wish we had medieval walls here. But anyways, so for me it was really interesting because it's a hot spot for archaeology students. But I do recall during my undergrad, we did talk a lot about Australian Aborigines and Indigenous peoples in Canada and their kind of sustainable practices. Yeah. So I think it's definitely interesting that you have that background, because it's perfect for what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to be... when I write and I talk about that, I'm very much, there probably wasn't 20 years ago, but there's a lot of Indigenous scholars, like people like Zoe Todd or Vanessa Watts, they're really scrutinising and, I think talking about this. And I think it's good because, as white Europeans, we should be on our toes about how we create knowledge and what claims we're making. Yeah, I think... No, I don't mean that. In fact, there's a Albert Marshall. He's an Indigenous elder. I think it's the Mi'kmaq, certainly First Nations. He talks about two-eyed seeing. And the two-eyed seeing is a method to, I suppose, take the best of what Indigenous knowledge has and take the best of what Western science has and create a better world. We shouldn't exclude one or the other. They should be... Indigenous knowledge isn't... I think that everyone's thinking about this, but actually, it's still not like our institutions, and even in places like Canada and the US where there is Indigenous people, even institutions aren't fully sharing the power, are they? I mean, there are moves, and when I say the power, that includes how knowledge is produced and what claims are made about how to make the world a better place. It's like Indigenous people should have an equal platform on that. But of course, really, there should maybe be a biased pendulum swing towards giving them some primacy over that.
Yeah, that's definitely great, because I've heard of some practices here in Canada, at least, that I know Indigenous peoples, they have this way of burning to keep forests healthy, and they have these different methods that they use. But obviously, when in sustainability, at least when I studied at university, we don't really acknowledge them as much.
Well, it's the same. Yeah, that's the globe over, isn't it? Same.
Yeah, great. So I guess, how do you keep up with the latest advancements and I guess the best practices in your field, especially when it comes to environmentally friendly cannabis production and processing?
Well,
so the latest innovation.
Cannabis specifically. Okay, well, I think we are where we are now, and there's a myriad of different strains and breeds and breeding that's gone on to create different strains. I think we could probably stop now. This is it's cannabis. That's what I mean. It's like anything in our overconsumptive cultures. It's like, when I've been to the Netherlands, it all seems a bit too much. So I'm not. And how do I keep up with it? I suppose I suppose I'm just locked into people who are talking and writing, sharing. And I mean, I've been part of the culture for over 35 years, and certainly once the internet came along, I, made more connections. I mean, it's a heterogeneous global culture. So that's how I keep up. And there's a lot of, like I say, there's a lot of corporate involvement. And on the one hand, I understand that it's helped normalise it as a medicine, and I totally appreciate that. And I see the importance of that. I also wince a bit at the corporate and the commercialisation of it. I mean, in the UK, you can get medical cannabis now. You have to go through specific clinics, and it costs money, and it's exclusionary. And whilst there are people in the corporate sector who are vocal about this, I still don't see how you can change things using. I mean, it's the quote we always see, isn't it, about the master's house and the tools, and like you said about the SDG goals, they're oxymoronic. My philosophical outlook, because I think Aldous Huxley said it, the ends doesn't justify the means because the means employed determine what the ends will be. It's an environment where that isn't the table. I think we can look after ourselves. I'm not anti-state. I'm not like this. I just think we can look after ourselves when it comes to this plant. Really, we can learn together. We don't only need to rely on state and corporation. And I mean that can be there, but I mean your questions are probably always going to lead me back to this same place, I'm afraid.
No, it's funny because I was just going to ask you about medical marijuana, but I guess we can go to that question because obviously, it's for when it comes to pain management and the opioid crisis, at least it's pretty bad here. You've seen things in Vancouver and whatnot online. Do you think that it could be because obviously it's capitalism again and big pharma, and they're not going to really. It's not really there. People are using it now a bit more. At least it's legalized here. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you want to go a bit more into that? Do you want to talk more about, I guess, medical marijuana? And like you said, it's difficult to kind of access it. It's only like sanctioned some parts.
So it's difficult. There's a large community of people who have been using cannabis as a medicine. I mean, they to be fair, a lot of them there's been a lot of activism, a lot of work done by people who are sort of perhaps more focused on it as a medicine and decided to align with that and not be so concerned with it as a recreational substance. And that's fine. I was never, some people had a problem with that. Some people maybe thought they were sellouts. You're just saying it, but I don't really think of it like that. I think that's fine, pushing it as a medicine. They're not out there saying it's only a medicine, it shouldn't be used for recreation. It's like they're not. But also within that community, there's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge production over the past 50 years, say. I mean, since marijuana really became sort of more part of the culture by the end of the 60s, I mean, and then it's really incrementally coming and going until now. So I think there's a lot of knowledge, and you often hear, stakeholders. You could say stakeholders, okay, to use a business term, but I'm not sure what happened in Canada, but I mean, I've actually got a friend in Canada who is in a place where it's legal, and he still goes to get it from non-legal regulated source because he doesn't like that's a whole different story. Stakeholders that seem to be shut out. So there's no ever talk about, well, if we are going to change the regulation with our relationship with this plant, let's talk to the people who know it the best. Let's talk to the people who've been using it for medicine. And it's always top down. The corporations have plucked a couple of activists out, and I don't mean to reflect on those activists negatively. They've got their own lives, they've got bills to pay, and maybe it's better that they're in there rather than there not being anyone with previous knowledge. But that's not enough to my mind. So coming back to what I was saying, I believe we can organise ourselves. without. But, that's always the problem. Is the state and corporation motivated to find ways to profit, because it's the system that's become the dominant system. It's about profit. How can we generate surplus values? And then you're talking about.
Yeah, no, great. I think also how, when you look at affordable alternatives to healthcare solutions, the idea of medical marijuana and not just challenging, I guess, mainstream Western pharmaceuticals, but also it ties into the idea of environmental justice. And you probably know the founding father of environmental justice, Julyan Levy, in the States.
Right.
Mostly because you've heard of like the Black Lives Matter movement, and it kind of ties back into that. So I think that's interesting to hear your perspective on that, how just to have more accessible healthcare solutions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially for marginalized communities, I imagine the States.
Absolutely. I mean, you could argue that science has been provided now. People can read, they can, like you say, especially marginalised communities, there's no way that, I don't know, there hasn't been a study, but I'd imagine the majority of people who can afford to access medical marijuana in the UK will be white.
Right.
And of a certain, massive generalisation, I know, and you'd have to do studies. So there's still, it's still, relationship is very much racialised in the UK still. I mean, what is it, 1 in 4, black youths, or 10 times more likely to be searched. I'm not great with stats on that, but so there's a big racial element in, and that would probably play into discourses around excess. And I think it's an invisible thing largely, but I don't think you can underestimate that in access as well. It's not just about affordability as well.
Okay, great. So from your perspective as a researcher, what are some of the most difficult obstacles you encounter when advocating for sustainable practices? So, for example, one of the ones you mentioned was small-scale urban agriculture. And I know out here in Calgary, there's this place called Balzac, and there's this huge urban farm, and I volunteered on it before. And obviously, that's a good solution to things like food insecurity and food deserts. But I still see we're following the American mindset of just a lot more fast food chains popping up everywhere, because Calgary's really been growing the last decade or so. But obviously, there's enough space and land to have more of those community gardens or something like that, urban, like that, what they have at Grow Calgary, and to do more small-scale agriculture, even to grow things like hemp. I think we tried to grow hemp there. Anyways, I'm curious, you've obviously seen the obstacles in advocating for these sustainable practices. So that would be good to hear.
Yeah, well, certainly, land, access to land is, that's the big one, isn't it? And that underpins everything. I mean, you can get an allotment here. You can get allotments in the UK.
Right.
Do you have that in Canada? Do you have similar?
You mean private purchases of for community gardens? Do you mean?
Well, no, they're like little tiny plots so you have a space that's maybe cut into maybe 30, 40 or 50 really small plots that people can grow food on. I mean, you couldn't grow enough on a plot to sustain yourself. You could provide.
Yeah, no, we
significant. Right, okay.
Yeah.
But it'd be great if you could grow cannabis in allotments. I mean, I think there's a British movie, I think, where they grow cannabis on an allotment. That to me would be a sustainable practice. I'll give you some carrot. You give me some carrots, I'll give you some bud.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think I'm going to try growing mine own. I'm getting my garden prepared, but I think I definitely see, especially among youth, these two divides. Either they're very gung-ho and they love community gardening and they're going in that direction and being very participative, or you see, and they're, some of them are even activists, joining things like Extinction Rebellion, and I remember covering those things as a reporter. Or you have, the ones that are just not about any of that. They just, they love the fast food chains coming in, all these American brands, and they just don't want to bother to know more about food insecurity. So I think that's interesting. But
I just think there's a really good video on YouTube called "Marijuana: Gateway to Urban Farming," I think it is, and it exemplifies everything really. It's just a small urban farm, and it shows that cannabis could be a really good plant to teach about growing food for those who might not think about growing food, maybe. Like I say, if young people, if suddenly they've got to grow it to use it, it's going to change. Maybe they might start thinking, I don't know if I want to go. I mean, this is really speculative, I know, but it's not like an alien concept that once you start putting your hands in the soil, it changes you and you want to do it more and you feel more connected. It's just what happens to us as humans. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that could only be a good thing, couldn't it? If you had like 16, 17-year-olds planting a school, it's kind of, I know this is like totally speculative, but a teacher as well. And I taught at a school where we had a garden and we also had teenagers who used cannabis. And to my mind, it's just like, they would love, the garden, they're not really interested in growing tomatoes and beans or... But if it was like they got to come to the garden because they've got to grow a cannabis plant, they'd be there every morning.
That's true.
They just would.
Yeah.
And suddenly they're caring. And suddenly they're thinking about, actually, I quite like tomatoes. Maybe I'll grow a tomato as well. I know that feels like science fiction right now, but that's the world I'd like to see. That their first exposure to cannabis is not an unhealthy relationship, which you can develop an unhealthy relationship with anything that changes your reality.
Right.
Of course, true. If you start smoking cannabis at 13, 14, 15, and you might not, but you might not. But I defy anyone to say there's no benefits from growing a plant and feeding it, putting your hands in the soil.
Yeah, definitely. I think everything in moderation, and I'm curious because it's going to be maybe in a couple of years, nearly a decade since cannabis has been legalized in Canada. And I'm interesting to see, for me, it'll be interesting to at least to see the research studies that come out because they say a lot of youth, and I don't know if it's hearsay, but that they're developing anxiety disorders, the ones that become addicted to smoking too much marijuana. And I've not seen that issue among me or any of my friends, but apparently it's become a thing. But when you look at alcohol and alcoholism, how bad it is, especially in Alberta, where I live, because I think we're the province with the highest rates of alcoholism.
So when we talk about cannabis addiction as well, what else is going on there? Whenever we talk about addiction, it's never just isolated about the substance, is it? I mean, there's genetics and say it's because the plant.
Right. Yeah, just to question the why behind it. I definitely agree. But I still think it's a safer alternative to alcohol consumption.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay. And now going a bit more into, I guess, the industry in the cannabis sector and its impact. So I'm curious, which environmental issues now affect the cannabis sector the most? And how can the numerous benefits, because you mentioned so many of these, how can they bolster climate action initiatives?
Currently, I'm not sure what the industry is doing to ameliorate climate. I think the only evidence I'm getting is they're just the next industry contributing. If you think about all the lighting and all the technology that someone has to produce to create the warehouses and so all the things that come and all the packaging. So all this new packaging that, it's not sustainable materials, is it? They can't think of that as well. It's like, we'll get to that. So that's another reason I think about homegrown and why you come back to these smaller scales, because it's less impact on the earth. That's just what happens again, coming back to scaling up. And you've got to keep things fresh. You've got to, have refrigerators probably generating to keep, just all the material technology that's needed when you scale up. So we're seeing that happening now with cannabis. And I mean, I suppose there may be carbon offsetting companies might put on their website, we're doing, we're going to plant trees, but that's another issue. I mean, I don't buy into carbon offsetting. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but it shouldn't be a thing that we think's going to solve on its own. I don't know. Maybe there are companies who are. I don't doubt that there's good people. I don't want to paint the corporate world all involved who are, working in trying to make things better. But that's not something I've looked into.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't want to use like hemp necessarily as a fail-safe just for more accelerating more growth, because
Yeah,
I thought
exactly.
it's, and I think it's a valid point, and maybe it buys again into that whole degrowth mindset. I didn't know hemp could capture so much CO2, like double like the amount typically.
You could have a network of growers. You don't, like I say, you could have like 1,000 acres, but it doesn't all have to be in one spot owned by one person. 100 different 100-acre spaces across, say, England, cooperatively run, non-profit cooperatively run. Maybe you'd have a couple of centralised processing plants, but maybe they could also be cooperatively run. I know this is idealistic, but I don't see why. There's already cooperatives in the UK. There's a hemp cooperative. It's not an unrealistic model, but then it means that there's not going to be corporations making the money.
You're right.
And that's all that's stopping us, I believe, is they're trying to, if they just made it easier for farmers, easier for people to farm it, you'd have to like facilitate people with knowledge, and you'd have to create a whole infrastructure to teach people how to. I mean, I can't see our government. Maybe a green government.
Yeah, maybe the Green. Well, nobody votes here for the Green Party, but no, unlike Sweden, where they genuinely believe it. But I think that's interesting. You mentioned hemp cooperatives, because obviously we have renewable energy ones, but we don't. Like, I didn't really think about that when it became like privatized here in Canada. That typically the licenses went to at least people that own the oil and gas companies. They bought up a lot of dispensaries, so it wasn't necessarily. All that there was not much quality in getting those licenses to open up your own stores.
And social clubs as well is another. There's a good organisation in the UK Cannabis Social Clubs, and that's sort of what they're trying to promote, is sets of localised clubs where you grow together, or maybe you're not a grower, maybe you're a patient, or maybe you're a recreational user, but it's little self-regulating units that. And you could have government involvement, I suppose. There's always scope for some kind of taxation system on license, really. If you could just apply for a license. No, I don't, whilst it feels utopian and idealistic, I actually don't see any reason why there's no rational explanation as to why you couldn't have a system like that in place.
Right.
Yeah, we're just fed the fact that, it's a dangerous plant, but it's kind of undermining people's ethic of care. People care a lot of the time, and they care about what they're growing and who's going to access it and the quality. And the actual people who do care. And we're not talking about people who are once again growing it for profit. Whether that's a corporation or whether that's someone who's there have been cases of modern slavery, people being enslaved to grow cannabis. That's obviously not what we're talking about.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So in comparison to other industry, how do you find the cannabis sector affects the environment? I know it's not legalized, but maybe you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, just kind of what I've touched on earlier, the new technologies, proliferation of packaging. There's going to be now even I think you get vending machines. Do you get vending machines in Canada?
Yeah, but I've not seen them for cannabis products. But yeah, we do.
So maybe that's in California.
I think that's probably an American thing. Yeah.
Yes, just to reiterate, the dominant economic system is having negative impacts on the environment, scaling up, lack of care, which comes, and I don't see the sector really talking about that. But not really. It's not. Mm-hmm. It's not a priority, is it? It's almost like, well, we're new to this, but that's why we have an opportunity before it really takes a grip to shape. I mean, maybe it's too late for America. Maybe it's too late for Canada, but because the system's already. But I feel that there's an opportunity in those places that haven't. I mean, and we are seeing alternatives. Places like Malta, Germany. And I'm not saying that these are perfect models, but they are at least looking at non-capitalist economic relationships as part of the policy reform.
Okay. Okay, interesting. So I guess what are some widespread misunderstandings, I guess, regarding sustainability in the cannabis sector, but also you mentioned the legalization. Like I had mentioned when I mentioned this to my Swedish classmates, I didn't realize it's more conservative, maybe in Stockholm and Sweden in general, to have ever legalized something like marijuana, whereas in other parts, like when I spoke to people in other parts of the EU, they weren't as apprehensive about it. So, and I guess that just comes back to that misunderstanding, maybe, like you had mentioned, about what the plant actually entails. Do you have any thoughts on that from your perspective?
So what do you mean? What are people's worries about?
Yeah, like misunderstandings, basically.
Okay, so that it causes psychosis. That's a huge misunderstanding. I think it does change your perception. It does. And some people, it can make you question the world we live in, or maybe sometimes you can be over analytical about your own. But I don't think it causes psychosis. I think in a few people, maybe they have genetic, or they have other psychological challenges, issues that maybe sometimes the cannabis doesn't help. But in other times, there's other studies that show that there's a correlation, because people who suffer from some mental health issues use cannabis to medicate those. Yeah, so that's, rather than it being the cannabis then causes the mental health issues, it's sometimes people with things like anxiety use cannabis to medicate. I think a lot of the time people don't realise that it's a subjective relationship also. It's not like one size fits all. And that is because of who we are as individuals, and also what the plant is as an individual. How's the plant been grown? What's its THC content, CBD content? Some strains might suit some people better. So this discourse that comes up often, that a new study's been done and it proves that cannabis causes psychosis, I just think is extremely misleading. That's the main one, I suppose. I don't find that helpful, because young people will experiment whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. They're not really properly. It's a lot of disinformation, like you said.
Yeah.
Not really looking at cause and effect properly. It's a slippery slope, or even like a red herring. And
cherry
I don't
picking.
think that's true. And cherry picking. I tried to explain it to my Swedish classmates, and I'm like, we don't have a drug problem. They're like, oh, Canada legalized all drugs now. No, we don't have like people addicts running around everywhere.
And also the fact that cannabis is framed as a drug and alcohol isn't. It's another. I mean, that's
right. Exactly. That's another thing.
That's just another, like, when in the community of drug policy reform activists that I sort of work with, that's like a big one. So we in the Green Party say alcohol and other drugs. That's one way of framing it for people. But even this term drugs, it's and even notions of addiction are sort of things are a lot more complicated and complex. We're more complex than that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. No, it does help to explain the antagonism. I felt, because I'm like, it's not something I'd mention to the Swedes.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to it's rooted in race. It might not be so much of a racist thing now, but it comes from a racist narrative. It comes from Reefer Madness. It comes from both the racism towards black, Mexican in the US. So it's by jazz musicians. It was the Reefer Madness narrative that came out and also from colonial India, Britain. The British colonialists experienced indigenous and Indian different cultures, people using cannabis and behaviours they didn't understand. You think about the British and the stiff upper lip, if you like, and being exposed to different ways of being. Lots of Indians were locked up in what were called mental asylums by the British for using cannabis. There's a whole book on genealogical history on that, history of madness and cannabis. I can't remember what it's called. Yeah, no, that's a great book, because it really shows the racism from the British, and that's played through. And I think that plays into. It makes you mad. It feels like it's the same when I see it, a Daily Mail article, or it feels like we're still looking at Reefer Madness and lock up your daughters. So it feels like it's the same discourse, and that's racist. And then it manifests in stop and search. The Mayor of London's trying to address it, but you're allowed to stop and search on the premise that you can smell cannabis. And it's
Right.
normally young black men that are stopping. Statistically, no more use it anymore. In fact, probably use it a little bit less than the white population. So, yeah, I think that's important to always be aware of, is that, prohibition is racist.
Right. And it ties back to the environmental justice kind of movement as well. Yeah, okay, that was definitely an in-depth spiel. Yeah, so just more about local sourcing. So how does the sustainability of cannabis cultivation relate to local sourcing? Like, you did talk a little bit about that through the small-scale farming and the cooperatives, but do you have anything else to add to that?
Yes, I mean, sustainability is about social sustainability as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So and relationships. That's what I understand as sustainability, is the plants, and I mean animals as well, and all the other beings that we share the world with. Yeah. So.
Okay, great. So, what area of sustainable cannabis cultivation has the greatest promise for the future prospects?
Yeah. So small scale. So with hemp, small scale agroecology, having limits on the amount of acres, regulated these things so that you can't. Big landowners can't monopolise the market. So it allows scale agroecology, permaculturists, growing hemp. And then on the other side, for the more specialised, it'd be social clubs. It'd be small community social clubs. Now, if the corporate capitalism is existing as well, that's fine. If people want to go to a vendor or a pharmacy and buy it through whatever that is, a kind of state corporate, that's fine. I mean, I'm not saying I don't want to see that. People prefer. And it means that people actually prefer to be part of a community, and the state corporate one ends up losing money and can't sustain itself. Well, then that dies. And with a small scale, that to me, if we want to talk about capitalism and free market, that to me actually seems closer to what they mean anyway, doesn't it? Let's pitch capitalism against non-capitalist forms and see which comes out on top, shall we?
Definitely to have that socially progressive and I agree. I would have loved to see more of that, and feel like it's more of the capitalistic side that we went towards. But that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's probably the way we'll go. Maybe it's the way we'll go. It's the way that the medical cannabis is sort of going. But things can change and develop. I don't think this future's decided.
Right. And I think what you mentioned too, just to add on to that, because I remember interviewing a UFC researcher, and he was talking about, psychedelics and indigenous practices and how they used to, and they still probably do, at least in more remote communities, to especially help with things like mental health issues and whatnot. So, and not being reliant on, big pharma. So I think there's so much potential in that. So
there is, because we don't know what the future looks like, and really we need to cultivate relationships with plants in we don't know, the world we put a lot of faith in these big, like the pharmaceutical industry, for example, and we saw in COVID, quickly there was no paracetamol on the shelves. Well, I don't know about where you are, but certainly in the UK, paracetamol, main painkiller, it ran out. So can we even rely on the pharmaceutical industry to provide us with things like pain relief anyway?
That's true.
We don't know what the future holds.
If you want to go into more detail, from a sustainability standpoint, what are the main distinctions between, I guess, opting for the larger scale commercial cannabis operation that you've been mentioning, but compared to like a smaller, more localized one in terms of the future?
So the main distinction, I suppose, is, scale and ownership and who's benefiting. So is it, I suppose, if you're going to create a binary, you've got the cooperative, with the shareholders. So it's about this. It's about ownership, access to resources and land, means of production. A lot of my thinking is rooted in a kind of Marxism, I suppose. I mean, I'm not purely a Marxist, because Marxism is often then produces large scale narratives and scaling up. Not that Marx necessarily meant that, I don't know, but if we think about what Chairman Mao did in China, that's not my interpretation of how Marxism works there. So
it's definitely more of a socially progressive lens. And,
communalism. But I always try and avoid the term communism, because I don't think people understand it. And I don't necessarily mean people who use it. I see a lot of discourse around about, especially from America, from like the radical left in the US, and I understand how they use it, and it aligns with but I don't use that term because I don't think it's a symbol. It's not always communicating what. Yeah, so communalism I find is a better term, or community economics, but not just the term communism, because people jump on that and they're like, oh, Stalin, and I've even seen actually memes on social media that then start bleeding into framing Stalin as a positive thing, and it's the waters get muddied when you use the term communism.
Yeah, you have to be careful. Yeah, it gets pretty political. Talking about political, so legalization, I know we mentioned this at the beginning, and I'm actually really curious about that, especially after my experience in Scandinavia. So the question is, what are the current and potential policy interventions that can promote sustainable practices and trends towards, of course, legalizing cannabis? Obviously in Canada, that's not an issue, but in the UK, Australia, it's not been legalized. So how does it work for you?
So, just policy. Yeah, so... Like I say, I work, with the Green Party drug policy, and we're explicit in promoting grow your own homegrown cannabis and I mean we haven't fully, I suppose, connected the dots, but it connects to agricultural policy, and you could even think about things like rewilding. You could just use cannabis as part of a rewilding crop and not even consider what that's what it's being used for.
Okay. So it's kind of tied to your Green Party in the UK. Like you have liberals and conservatives, like your political system, but it's more tied to like them, or
so the Green Party in the UK, I'd say, is a more radical. It's quite I'd say it's quite. I mean, there's not saying there's not liberals in the UK Green Party, but it's not UK. Scottish has its own Green Party. I'd say it's very left and largely radical in most of its policies, but really, when I say radical, it's just asking for taxation of mega wealth. It's asking for things that the Labour Party did once upon a time, but doesn't anymore. Like making a healthcare system accessible to, it's a bottom-up approach. So I suppose that's where drug policy comes in. I mean, the Green Party would legalise and regulate all our relationships with all drugs. Obviously, that doesn't mean those relationships look the same. They all look different depending on the substance. You wouldn't regulate opium in the way that you regulate cannabis.
But there's an entirely different sentiment attached to it. Like that's a hard no.
Well,
so it's like interesting to see the
but that's absolutely, it's totally different. But it's a widely used substance in the UK. And where's it coming from? What relationships are happening in South America? Unethical relationships are, who's profiting and having to be cut down to grow the coca leaf and that kind of things. And that, I suppose, the same you could say for cannabis. What are you, if you're having mass monocultures of hemp? Thinking of hemp now, I'm not sure you could. I mean, you can have large monocultures of medical cannabis grown in a warehouse. I've seen pictures of warehouses in the US. I haven't even touched on the autonomy of the plant. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any permission or respect. You're treating the plant like
like a commodity, basically.
Yeah, it becomes a commodity. That's exactly it. I think that's part of our problem. Part of the problem is treating plants and animals as commodities.
Yeah, and it explains like the addictions epidemic that we have, and I like how you explain that you have to have a genuine relationship with the plant. Yeah.
But you can grow cannabis pretty much anywhere.
Right. Okay. Interesting. And because you don't have at least in Canada we had a marijuana party. It got disbanded obviously when legalized, but I guess I wonder if in the UK they think that if we legalize pot, then it might lead to maybe a trickle down thing where all the rest of these drugs might be legalized.
Yeah, that's another myth, another concern. Yeah, if you start, and of course, Canada. I know someone who's a stickler for language and, talks about a plant can't be illegal.
Right. That's true.
But I still say legalise cannabis, even though it's actually our relationship with it that we want to regulate and legalise.
Right.
Of course, you want a legal system, because with decriminalisation, you would still allow gaps for police to sort of a grey area, but it's certainly a stepping stone that needs to happen ASAP, really.
Right. Okay, great. Well, it's definitely interesting to hear your perspective on, because I was always wondering about why is it legal, but maybe Canada, maybe more countries will follow suit and start doing that.
Yeah, it's strange it is strange how the global economy is operating right now, with plant becoming a major resource and another commodity that's producing lots of money. And yet it's sort of, the borders are, somehow, although I say that, but actually I know quite a few people who buy cannabis vape pens. So I say that, but actually the market is bleeding everywhere. There's a newsagent somewhere in the county I live in where you can just go and buy these vape pens under the counter. And they're either coming from Canada or US or maybe the Netherlands, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, do you have any sage advice you want to give out?
I think just we need to seriously think about respect and a little bit of reverence for this plant, because it has got a lot of agency, and there's no doubt that it's had a huge impact on humanity, and it continues to have a huge impact. And I think we need to respect. I see her, him, them. So we need to respect this plant, and I think through respecting it and developing an ethics of care, we might find a really healthy relationship that benefits both us and the plant.
Yeah, I totally agree. Great, perfect. Well, thank you so much again for doing this. I didn't expect to learn so much, and it's definitely interesting to hear your perspective compared to what it is where I live.
Thanks so much for tuning in to yet another eye-opening episode of Sustainable You. Again, this is an extraordinary and engaging info series whose purpose is to make sustainable development and sustainability accessible to the average person in their quest to quench their knowledge on environmentalism. Be sure to leave your feedback by liking this week's released edition and by subscribing to this podcast. Again, any love from our followers is much appreciated. Signing off until next time.